We're going to talk about a special needs trust.
My youngest son is autistic. There's a lot of considerations and there's a lot of things that just go through your mind. Is he going to be okay financially? Are the people that are taking care of him going to treat him well? So there's that balance of making sure everything is planned for.
We're going to talk about qualified terminal interest properties, or what's known as a Q-tip.
I want to protect my second spouse. I want to make sure he or she is okay, but there's no way I can put her in my will because my will is designated for my kids.
It's a very interesting way to hit multiple goals of making sure your spouse feels loved and protected, and you also are protecting your wealth for your bloodline, ultimately your kids. We're going to talk about irrevocable life insurance trust. It avoids the mess when you die, but it does absolutely nothing for you tax-wise while you're living.
Then if you die, you have 9 months to pay the estate tax. The benefit of life insurance.
You pass 10 million, 100 million, 1 billion, doesn't matter the amount of money. 3 generations after you pass, 97% of the time the money's gone. There's a reason for this, and the reason is a lack of estate planning. Today, we're going to talk about strategies that you're part of the 3% that effectively passes your wealth on, and your children are able to stay financially secure, and your children's children as well. The basic type of estate planning that we believe everyone should need is the revocable trust, and the revocable trust accomplishes a couple of things. The first thing is it avoids probate. So I'm sure you guys can share stories, but probate is a huge deal. After losing a loved one, if you don't have direct beneficiaries or revocable trust, your assets have to go through a court system, which can take a lot of lawyer fees and 3 to 6 months. And this is occurring while you're trying to mourn the loss of a loved one. So absolutely devastating. So revocable trust, there's a lot of names for this. If you have a family trust, these are very important to have to receive assets. Sometimes you can actually have the assets owned by the revocable trust. And what this does is it avoids the mess when you die, but it does absolutely nothing for you tax-wise while you're living. It's the same as you holding it individually. It's in your estate. It's not out of your estate. So this is just table stakes that we recommend. And you can make a revocable trust turn into an irrevocable trust when you die. But doing that is really important maybe for structure and governance of your kids and family after you pass. But again, doesn't accomplish anything from a estate planning tax perspective while you're living. So today, we're going to talk through different types of the complex trusts, which are known as irrevocable trusts. Irrevocable trusts, once you set them up, you most of the time don't have the flexibility to change it. So these are big decisions. A lot of clients kick the can down the road, and then if you never implement it, a lot of money is wasted, either from a tax perspective or just from a governance perspective. If your kids aren't in the know or spouse aren't in the know, if you're on a second marriage and your spouse gets remarried, there's countless examples. So today, we're going to talk about several types of trusts. We're going to talk about if you have a special needs child, a special needs trust. We're going to talk about irrevocable life insurance trust. We're going to talk about Q-tips, which are appropriate if you're married for the second time. And today, we're going to focus on not nerding out on all the specific details. We're going to give examples. We're going to talk about which one's appropriate given situations that we've seen, and share. People learn from people, so we want to share some of the perspective we learned over the last not to date you, Jimmy, but 30 plus years. And for me, about 15 years.
I don't look it though, do I?
Not at all. Not at all. Well, Jimmy, let's start with you. So special needs trust, what would be the purpose of setting one up? And I know you have a lot of this is especially you've had for your whole career, including, your own situation.
Yeah. So, this is its own because I actually have a special needs trust. My youngest son is autistic. He's 28. He is not able to live on his own. I also have a healthy, typical 30-year-old. So when Lori, my spouse, when we were thinking about Zach and, who's going to be taking care of him when we're not able to anymore, there's a lot of considerations and there's a lot of things that just go through your mind. Obviously, the first one is he going to be okay? Is he going to be okay financially? Are the people that are taking care of him going to treat him well? But the second consideration is we also don't want this to be our typical son's, life job either. So there's that balance of making sure everything is planned for. So the thing that you really want to be careful about with special needs trusts is you can't have assets in the disabled child's name. The limit is $2,000. So anything over $2,000 in the child's name could potentially disallow him from government benefits, which is what you want. You want as many government benefits as possible for your child. So we set up a trust. We funded it with our assets. We named trustees. We are the trustees now. My oldest son is, the successor trustee. But at least we know that in this document, Zach will be able to receive any government or Social Security disability benefits, which he currently does receive. But, when Lori and I are not here, we have the comfort of knowing that there is a corpus of money that we'll be able to provide for Zach, and that our oldest son, Ben, will not have to be financially responsible for that obligation. And, those are difficult discussions and they're very emotional, but they need to be had.
No question. No question. So, and thanks for that personal example, Jimmy. So I know the funding mechanism. So obviously if you have, I'm thinking of a couple examples, and I personally have a sister with special needs. And so there's examples of, if you set this up, a question is what happens if the parents outlive the special needs beneficiary. So in this case, like my sister had passed a couple years ago. And so there are ways to, hers was primarily funded with a second to die life insurance policy. Because when you think about this as a parent, as a couple, probably in your head, okay, if the husband is living, the child is going to be taken care of, right? Because a lot of your life is dedicated towards the emotional and financial and just the overall support and decision making that has to occur for this child's care. So if the husband's alive, it's going to be taken care of. If the wife's alive, it's going to be taken care of. So I think the first step, regardless of net worth, is answering the question: if one of us passes, does the surviving spouse have the time and resources alone to care for the child? And so I think the first step before the special needs trust is you have to make sure that question is a yes. And that could be a stress test of your net worth. That could be life insurance that goes to each other if you die. And then the second step, and regardless of that first step, you kind of know everything's going to be okay if it's just one of you gone, right? It's going to be tough, but that spouse is going to take care of them. So the big question is, what happens if you both pass? Is there going to be enough money to care for the child, right? And so a second to die life insurance policy generally is the solution to that, because you can get pennies on the dollar, get a large amount. If you say the kid needs $10,000 a month, and just doing some quick back of the napkin math, like a $2.5 million insurance policy is going to cover that. That's cheap. That's easy. But and then there's the dependent of the flexibility. Well, what if it's likelihood, if you're in, my parents' situation, where statistically they're probably going to outlive given the condition of my sister. They had done one that had significantly accumulated cash value. So, when she passed before they did, they were able to ultimately terminate the trust because they were the trustees, and then, invest that money in a regular
you could
will.
build in a lot of flexibility into a special needs trust to take account for all the scenarios that you just mentioned. But the biggest takeaway is obviously, what happens when we're not here? Yeah. And that is always the driving force behind, if you have a special needs child, as long as we're alive, for our house, it was, if I'm alive or if Lori's alive, Zach's going to be fine. The issue is, if we're not here, we need to make sure he's fine, and we don't want that to be Ben's responsibility.
So what advice would you give to a client that doesn't have, a second child that you could name as trustee? Like if your special needs kid is the only kid, what have you seen? Is it an uncle? Is it a family member? Are there corporations that would step in?
It's probably a combination of the two, Matt. You probably, at the end of the day, you will need some type of corporate structure in place if the disabled child is an only child. But the idea of having a family member or a friend working alongside the corporate trustee will probably give a lot of comfort to the family.
Absolutely. But I think, regardless of net worth, if you're, high net worth, you may be able to just put investments or, cash that gets invested inside the special needs trust. If you're high net worth, the life insurance, you may like the structure of that tax-free nature being inside, where it's, we're fine if we're here. If we both are not here, that solves that issue. But yeah, please reach out. We have, obviously major firepower here with Jim. It's been a large part of his practice. I've witnessed, before EWA and, obviously during EWAs, lots of families that he's handled special needs trust for. So definitely a specialty of EWAs now, thanks to Jimmy. So, okay, well, Jamison, let's go to you.
Yeah, we'll talk about irrevocable life insurance trust. So you mentioned the concept with different structures. So just from a high level estate planning overview, and people will argue this, but our opinion is if the estate tax is going to come into play for you, which right now is $30 million for a couple, $15 million per person, anything above that is a 40% federal estate tax of death. So low-hanging fruit is, let's not have life insurance owned on your personal balance sheet. Let's have life insurance owned by a trust and the benefits of that. Once that pays out into the trust, it avoids the 40% federal estate tax. So an irrevocable life insurance trust is an irrevocable trust. Somebody other than yourself has to be the trustee in general on a standard ILIT. That could be a family member, it could be a corporate trustee, it could be anyone you want. You fund the money into it generally with, and there's a million different ways to structure this, but just simplest terms, you have 2 children, you're married, you have $19,000 per year per person as of 2025. So that's $76,000 per year that could be funded into that. That goes into the trust. The trust then purchases life insurance, depending on your age and health. Maybe that buys you a couple $1 million of insurance. At death, that pays out inside the trust. It's all tax-free. So benefits are avoiding tax. You get the same structure and benefits of a normal trust where it's creditor protected, asset protected, avoids probate. You can have rules on when they use the money. And one of the big benefits of having life insurance incorporated in your estate plan is think of 2 primary examples. Number one, if liquidity is a concern, so we see people that their balance sheets are heavily concentrated in business interest, real estate, different type of private investments that aren't liquid. And if you die, you have, is it 6 months to pay 9 months, I think, to pay the estate tax, 9 months to pay the estate tax. And instead of doing a fire sale of assets, you have this life insurance that pays out that can help cover that. Second main reason is if your plan is, well, I have enough assets saved that I could just pay for this, that's great. But if the market's down when you die, there could be a correction in the market, assets could be down, they're invested in stocks substantially. You don't want to have to sell things at a loss to pay for this estate tax. So life insurance is going to pay out regardless of what the market's doing. It's a fixed number that grows, and you kind of can avoid any of the market volatility. And then one example of this is we have a client, very young, is relative to net worth, he's in his 30s, worth like $50 million. And talking about estate planning is obviously going to be over that exemption. Talking about lifetime gifting, he's not going to, his kids are all 3 under the age of 5. He's not going to directly gift money into their name. And so an easy way to do that is gift it into a trust and use like a 20-pay structure, for example, so we do for him. He's using that gifting exemption, gifting into the trust. The trust buys life insurance for 20 years. That gets the kids to mid-20s. At that point, you can reevaluate. Okay, I have this trust that's funded with this life insurance contract. And because he's young, he's getting the very high death benefit. And then at that point, kids are in their 20s. He can evaluate, do I want to gift money directly into their name? Do I want to gift it to have them then fund investments? And so it can be a good mechanism if kids are under the age of 18 and you have a nice runway where you can pump money into it and then the trust is fully funded.
Yeah, and those you're referring to obviously, whole life policies that are dividend participating. So in that example, it's basically like, three times whatever the gifting exemption was. I think it was like 17,000 we set up. So it's basically 51,000. We did one on him, we did one on the wife, and so we have a little bit over 100,000 going out of their estate every year. No gift tax return, just crummy letters because it's under the exemption. And when you fund, 100 a year at that age into life insurance and have it complete in 20 years, I think it's projected if just at current dividend scale, which are historically we're at a lower rate because interest rates are just recently been high, is that, there's like $15 to $20 million at their life expectancy age that's already going to be out of their estate. And most people would just say, I'm not going to do trust planning in my 30s. I'm going to just wait till my kids are grown up because I don't want to give them money when they're 1, 3, and 5. But this allows them to use those freebies. It's kind of like a 401k limit, tax free to get it in. And then, essentially they will be over the limit. So that strategy, they haven't wasted any of their exemption. It's 40% of 20 million that they just saved $8 million in taxes by doing that.
It's a real opportunity to create generational wealth. It's a powerful tool.
Another tax efficiency point is if you gift investments and you give cash by investments into a trust, trusts are subject to a compressed tax rate. Anything over like 20-ish thousand a year is hit at 37%. And so there's ways with tax loss harvesting, and if the trust's a grantor trust or not, that you can help offset some of that. But you can't always eliminate it. You can be as tax efficient as possible. So the dividends that pay out, like this is a really high number in this trust. The benefit of life insurance is all of the growth on the cash value you don't pay taxes on. It's tax deferred. So it's a much more tax efficient asset to hold inside of a trust, especially relative to bonds or cash, versus, something that you're going to be paying taxes on every single year.
No question. Yeah. So the next one that we see absolutely a lot is, we have a high net worth spouse that gets, they're on their second marriage and they have kids. Maybe both spouses in the second marriage have kids from prior marriages. And so the concern when you're in your second marriage, there's lots of concerns, right? You don't want to get divorced a second time. And part of that is the financial, we'll call it the emotional, the power, the financial dynamics that all come into play when you're high net worth on your second marriage. So some of the things that we need to address is if one of them passes first, they're both worried. Both spouses are worried about if all the money goes to my second spouse, are my kids going to see any of it? Is that person going to get remarried again? And then, the will gets changed, the trust gets changed, and my kids don't see any of it. So because of that, concern, and then there's other concern is, well, if I favor my kids too much, is my spouse, like let's say from a male perspective, my spouse going to leave me? I need someone to take care of me when I'm older. So this is, what a qualified terminal interest property, so what's known as a Q-tip trust comes into play, also known as a marital trust. So just really simple example, you have two spouses, let's say a net worth of 20 million, and let's say we split it. So you're married, you've got 3 kids. We say 10 million goes right to an irrevocable trust that's immediately directed to 3 kids. So they each get 3.33 million, a third, a third, a third. Once you die, that goes into thirds. The other 10 million, which is still half your property, you're like, I want my example, my wife to be taken care of. So that 10 million, it could go directly to her, or you could go into a Q-tip. So the way the Q-tip would work, just to nerd out here for a second, is that 10 million she would get interest from. So let's just say she'd be able to take $500,000 a year. Now, principal distributions would have to be approved by a trustee, which could be her, and a co-trustee could be kids, right? So that could create some conflict. But it's the purpose of this is the principle of that's protected. So the kids ultimately, when she dies, gets the 10 million. If she gets remarried, her and her new spouse only get the interest. The principal has to be approved typically for a HEM standard, so health, education, maintenance, and support. So the goal of this is to make sure that present principal, it won't be adjusted for inflation, because 10 million, if she lives another 20 years, wouldn't be 10 million, it would be worth 5 million. But that a portion of that really goes to the kids as well. So one decision could be, if you're married, is does all 20 million go to the Q-tip, or does half of my money go to the kids directly, half the money go to the spouse, or does half that money go to a Q-tip? So it's a really unique strategy. So, your spouse, especially if there's an income or net worth difference between the spouses, let's say you have a prenup or a postnup or whatever it is, it's a very interesting way to hit multiple goals of making sure your spouse feels, loved and protected. And you also are protecting your wealth for your bloodline, which is your new spouse, and then also ultimately your kids. So
yeah, no question, Matt. And, fortunately or unfortunately, we see this a lot. And, I have one client in particular who I'm thinking about where, at the end of the day, what we always hear is, I want to protect, my second spouse. I want to make sure he or she is okay, but there's no way I can put her in my will, because my will is designated for my kids. So there's that balance that needs to be created. And I think the nice thing about the marital trust is you really are addressing both concerns. There is the income that's going to go out to the second spouse. So, from a day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year perspective, she's going to be taken care of, or he, and my kids get the corpus of the value of the trust. So, we all know, and I'll speak to this particular client, men do not like to be alone as they get older. So this is always a discussion. So you definitely want to make sure that we are protecting the interests of the second spouse without really alienating the children and making sure that they are still the primary beneficiaries of the estate or the trust or whatever we're talking about. So it's a very helpful tool in what can be a very difficult situation and conversation.
Yeah. So I'm going through a totally different example. I just want to share. So this client was, I'm just gonna round. It was like 30. We're just gonna say $30 million, and the husband had 3 kids from a prior marriage. The wife had no kids, and so what we decided to do is basically divide this plan by 3. So the wife got some money directly if upon a death, and actually in her name now. The second part of this plan was this Q-tip, where if the husband died, the Q-tip was funded with about $10 million. And so that was, interest only. And now their lifestyle required more than her just getting 10 in her individual name. Like she would used to, higher lifestyle. The other 10 million is going directly to the kids. So ideally, if this plan works out, she'll be fine with the lifestyle she's accustomed to. She'll have 10 in her name, 10 in the Q-tip, and then the kids have the 10 directly if he dies, and then also the principal of that Q-tip 10 when she dies. So that, just as a pure example, that was a third. And what we saw after that, there was lots of conflict about finances. She felt like the husband was prioritizing the kids. The kids were worried because there was a little bit of an age gap. What if it happens our dad dies? And they all have good relationship. Like the second wife and the kids had a good relationship, but it causes all kinds of conflicts when these things aren't discussed, and all kinds of resentment and who's more important. And so after laying this plan, having some private discussions, obviously, and then some, transparency of what people needed to know, kids, wife, etc. The year following that, we just saw a lot of peace. And not saying that there was some disagreements that still occur, but ultimately the second wife feels very comfortable and secure. That the husband feels very secure. He's taking care of everybody, and the kids are also, very grateful that there's wealth guarantee there as well. So,
and I've seen an example, similar situation. One spouse literally said, "I hate the kids from the past marriage," and so,
which is very common, by the way.
Very fun. So what if you don't do all of this planning? One of the things that happened is one spouse that wants money to go to spouse and kids gets concerned that, well, if this money passes to my spouse, they're just going to spend it all and my kids aren't going to get anything. So this is a way to protect it. They get the income need they get, and then it doesn't matter what the relationship is because the trust outlines what the money's used for and how it passes.
It's really important to, ultimately, the success of this is going to be based upon the documents, but more importantly is who the trustee is. Because, if you choose the wrong trustee, like Uncle Joe or whoever, and he gets worn out in the first 6 months of dealing with this conflict, and it could be a full-time job, he's just going to, let whatever give up, and the money is going to be gone pretty quickly. So that the documents have to be secure, and the trustee, typically having some kind of corporate trustee alongside a family member, but making your second spouse and your kids co-trustees, probably not.
Yeah, ultimately there's going to have to be a bad cop example sometimes, and sometimes that's difficult for families to do. So
that's why we got Jimmy.
That's why we offer trustee services at EWA.
No doubt.